In this video, we're going to talk 100% about the optimizer and how to optimize a plan. Before we get started with that, I'm going to show you one quick thing. You heard in that first video me reference jaw tracking and those jaws being able to move during the treatment. That setting is actually right here in the optimizer, okay? Jaw tracking, and by default it's turned on. There are certain circumstances where we might want to turn that off, but we'll talk about that when that comes up. For now, we're just going to leave that checked. All right, and the first thing we need to do is down here, it tells you in order to optimize a plan, you need at least one lower objective, which makes sense, right? Before the optimizer, before the algorithm can do anything, it needs to know what we want to give dose to, right? So I'm going to put an upper and a lower on both these PTVs. And the reason why I suggest if you have multiple PTVs like this, even if you have a PTV total, I don't use this PTV total hardly at all. I use all the individual PTVs. And the reason is pretty simple. So if I'm shooting for 95% coverage, say of this PTV total, right? I could get 95% coverage on this PTV total, but maybe in order to make that happen, I only have 90% on my nodes and 100% on my prostate, right? It's just, I don't have as much control as if I use the individual PTVs. I want 95 or better on both these volumes, right? So in order to make sure I get that and make sure that one of them is not cold and one of them, covered way better, I'm going to use the individual PTVs. Okay, it just gives you a little bit more control, I feel like, when you do that. That's what I do. Excuse me. I'm gonna give you guys a pretty simple kind of formula and some simple rules to follow that you could use on almost all of your cases. Okay, and this is how I optimize my plans. Of course, there are some times we need to deviate a little bit or do some extra things and tricks, which we'll, of course, learn all about those and go over those as the semester progresses. But really, the bones of it, I'm going to show you right here. And before we get started, I just want to mention one of the hardest things I think about this semester is going to be the fact that you're going to learn how to optimize from several different people, right? And every dosimetrist optimizes a little bit differently. There's a ton of different ways to do this, ton of different ways to think about it. And what I'm going to ask of you guys is that you really give my way a shot, at least in these labs and stuff. I want you to try doing it exactly how I'm going to show you how to do it. And I promise as the semester goes on, it'll start to make sense. And I think doing it this way is going to really help you understand how the optimizer works, how the algorithms work, how the different things that are happening in the different steps, just everything. I think you'll, by the end of this, get a really good understanding, really good picture of what's all happening, okay? So let's get started. So the first thing I do is I put an upper and a lower on all my targets. A lot of times I'll put them on my GTVs too, CTVs. You can't really put it on too many, okay? But just to keep this a little bit cleaner and simpler, I'm going to only do my PTVs for now. Excuse me. I'm going to put 146 on both these. So basically that's a min dose of 4600 is what I'm asking for. And then on these uppers, I'm going to put 0% at 105% of our dose. In this case, 4830. Okay, so a min dose 4600, a max dose 4830. NTO, this normal tissue objective, is a very important tool. By default, it is on. The priority is set to 100 and it's set to automatic. We're going to leave that alone for now. It's very important to understand how that tool works. I'm going to go over that tool in greater depth probably next week. Okay, so stay tuned for that. For now, though, just leave it as is. All right, I am going to check both of these boxes. So all these mean is this automatic optimization mode. If you hover over it, if you hover over a lot of these tools, it'll kind of give you an explanation of what they are, what they do, which is sometimes helpful when you're first getting started. But basically this just means it's gonna continue along in the optimization process automatically. We don't have to manually move it along. And intermediate dose, basically the optimizer runs on an algorithm that is a little bit less accurate but faster to help speed this process along. And when it gets done optimizing, if you have intermediate dose turned on, it'll do a slightly more accurate calculation, okay? And then it'll bounce it back into the later stages of the optimizer, let it fix itself a little bit if it notices, some differences in those doses. You should definitely calculate intermediate dose for cases that have a lot of large inhomogeneities, in the plant, so like lungs. You definitely want to turn it on. For other cases, it's not super necessary, but it's generally, at least in this environment and a lot of Eclipse environments, pretty quick. The calculation is pretty quick, so I just leave it on all the time. But it's kind of up to you. You can uncheck that if you want this to go a little faster. All right, so all I do to get started is I put my targets in. That's it, and I click start. So let this get going here. All right. So as it gets started, we have a lot going on over here, okay? So I'm going to talk about all of this while this progresses a little bit. So obviously we have our DVH right here, so we can see what our DVH looks like, and that's going to be how we tell if we're meeting objectives, right, for our OARs and for our targets. We have our isodose distribution over here, and you have some tools up here, pretty self-explanatory. It works exactly like you're used to. You can scroll, you can pan, you can zoom, you can look at point doses, you can do all these things. I very regularly look at all three of my views here. Okay, I do not just look at axial. I think you should look at all three. It gives you a really good idea of what's going on. All right, down here you get a little bit more information. To be honest, I don't look at this too much, other than it's important to know what step you're in right here. And it's important to, in general, keep a good eye on your monitor units, okay? Okay, so these two over here these two graphs are actually showing you the same thing, okay? So if we look here, the body, this green, is this top green line. Our PTV initial is this orange line. Our PTV boost is this very bottom line, okay? So they're showing the exact same thing, just in two different ways. But they're both still useful. So this one on the left is useful because it shows you spikes. So what this is if you read that little description right there that pops up when you highlight over it, it is excuse me, bad cough. It's a representation of the objective, the cost function. Let's get that pop up to come back. Objective function chart shows how the relative cost of the objective evolves with the optimization. So every constraint that we put in here is going to contribute to the total cost function for that OAR. And if you imagine what's happening in the background, so we're running an optimizer. So the whole point of the optimizer, what the optimizer is trying to do is take all of our input and spit out the best output, basically, right? So we're telling it we want to meet these objectives, okay? The priority contributes to the cost function, and the priority goes from 0 to 1,000, okay? So for targets, I want everyone to start at 100 for their priority, okay? And we're starting at 100 because our NTO defaults to 100. That's literally why. Right now, everything priority is the exact same, okay? Everything is equal. And what this NTO is doing, just really quickly, is it's helping get our isodose distribution conformal around our target. So we're right now balancing that conformality around our target with our coverage and our hotspots and all that, okay? Right now, if you look at this, the body represents this NTO constraint right here. So basically, the optimizer is having to work the hardest on keeping the plan conformal, okay? So compared to the PDV initial and PDV boost constraints that we have in here, it's having the hardest time with the NTO. But if you look at our DVH and our isodose distribution, it's pretty conformal. We have really good coverage. Our hotspots are totally fine. That just tells me the overall everything is easy for the optimizer to do right now, okay? So it's just kind of a bar graph, and we're going to talk about these a lot, but because basically it just allows you to look at how the optimizer is prioritizing those and what it's struggling with, things like that. Okay, so we'll continually talk about that. So this one, you look at this one to see what's on top, what the optimizer is struggling the most with. This one, you look at to see these spikes. So I'm going to add a OAR over here, and we're going to watch what this graph does. But I want you to notice something. So I put the targets in first, right? That's it. I pushed play, and I let it play until step 3 in this level 1. So by the time it gets to step 3, with only the targets in here, your DVH should look perfect. You should have basically perfect coverage, no hot spots, no cold spots. It should look great. If your DVH and dose distribution does not look great, you're never going to get better than it is. You're not going to improve. What that tells me is that we need to change our beam arrangement. So if you start this way, it's a really good indicator of whether or not your beam arrangement is going to be okay. All right, if it does not look good after this, you need to go, you messed up your beam arrangement somehow. Either your collimators or your jaw settings, something with your beams need to change, okay? It should look perfect conformality and coverage-wise right now, okay? Step 3 is where I pause it, okay? I hit that pause button right here. So right now it says play. You want to pause it in step 3, and this is where I add all my OARs in. In general, you can, if a certain OAR is more important than another, or you think one's going to be tougher than the rest, you can start with that one if you want. In general, I literally just go top to bottom, okay? I don't think you need to overthink that part of it, okay? So we're gonna pick the bladder right here. It's the first one. I'm gonna start adding objectives. So before I even look at what the physician is asking for objectives, before I even look at those objectives, I mean, I've been doing this long enough, I kind of have an idea of what they are in my mind, right? So, I mean, it's not that you don't look at them, but my point is I am going to add objectives and try to get this plan to look as best as I think I can get it regardless of those objectives. One of the toughest things about this is not all objectives that you're given are going to be meetable. You're not going to be able to meet all your objectives. Some you're going to be able to blow out of the water and just do way better than, right? So the hard part for us is how do you determine what's possible, right? You want the best plan you can get, regardless of what constraints and objectives you're given by a physician, right? So how do we know that? So I'm going to try to help you guys be able to tell what's possible and how do you look at a plan and know that it's optimized appropriately, okay? So before we even talk about what objectives we're trying to meet, we're just going to start shaping out this plan and this DVH. So I'm going to throw a upper constraint on my bladder, and we're going to start, I'm just going to pick kind of in the middle of the OAR right now, and we're going to start dragging it down. So when you first add an objective, the priority is 0, so it gives you some time to either type in or drag that objective to where you want it to be. And for our OARs, we're going to put 50 in for our priority. That's where we're going to start at least. So right when I did that, if you look down here, bladder is up at top, and this spiked right here, okay? Spiked really high. All that means is that right when we typed 50 in, the optimizer immediately notices that we're not meeting that objective that we put in, that constraint that we put in, right? And so the cost function for the bladder spikes really high. It made everything spike, right? Because it's not meeting this constraint. But you can see as the optimizer finds solutions to the new problem that we just gave it, this new constraint, as the DVH starts to move, toward this constraint that we added, that cost function goes down, and you can see this graph start to go down. The bladder peaked and was the highest percentage of the cost function up here, but now it's fallen down to 3rd place, right? So I don't want anyone to panic if they see big log spikes. It just means that you kind of gave the optimizer a shock. You kind of shocked the system, right? All you need to do is give it some time to think. Now, you'll hear people say, the plane blew up on me or something like that. It is totally possible to put this way too low. Like if I do something like this, you can see the bladder shoots way out. This spike is, way bigger than that first big spike. I'm giving it something that's probably impossible for it to do. Okay. If you do that, you're going to end up with a subpar plan. You need to give it somewhat reasonable constraints, and in general, I suggest slowly stepping the dose to your OARs down, not just big jumps like this. But I want to point out something. Our plan is not completely ruined right now. It is not totally blown up. We still have fairly good coverage. Little tail right here, so we do have a little hot spot, but it's not totally ruined or blown up. And that has to do a lot with the relationship of our priorities over here. Our targets are still 100. Our bladder is half that. Okay, it's a very safe relationship. So another reason why I suggest starting this way. But if you see something like this, if this bladder is staying that far out in front of our PTVs like this, and if you add an objective right here that your line just is not even getting close to it, we're just giving it an impossible objective. It's not going to produce the best plan for you if you do this. So we're going to back off a little bit on that one, okay? And as we do that, our coverage will come back, our conformality will look a little better. It'll just look a little cleaner. One of the easiest ways, one of the first things I'm going to tell you guys in regards of how to look at an isostress distribution and tell if it's properly optimized or if you've pushed hard enough, is to just use the 50% isostress line. Okay, so if we look at this 50% line, which is the white line, you can see that white line is very tight to our PTV. If we look sagittally right here, we're carving a lot of that dose out of the bladder. Okay, that's pretty good. That's what you want to see. You want to see your 50% line. If you're really trying to avoid an OAR like this, we want to see that 50% line carve out of there. We can probably do even better and get, the 40%, 30% line to carve out of there. But to start, I'm gonna definitely take a look at your guys' 50% line to help me determine if you guys have pushed, hard enough on a structure. Okay, so you want your 50% line to really push out of that structure. If we look on our axial slices, you can see that dose is really carving out of that bladder. So that's what we want to see. But conversely, if you look at your rectum, if I were looking at this plan, I would immediately know that the planner for this did not push on the rectum at all. We still got the whole thing covered by 50%, no good. So let's fix that. Let's add one on our rectum. In real life, this is more how I would suggest doing this. So we're gonna put 50 on, and I'm gonna again just kind of pick the middle of my OAR and just kind of slowly pull the dose back. So I added that objective in there. It spikes a little bit. You can let this graph level out a little bit. Basically, it spikes, and as it's coming, if this graph is moving in the downward direction, that means the optimizer is finding better and better solutions for your plan. Okay, so it's looking at a bunch of different MLC patterns basically right now, and if it finds a better one, it's going to keep that, right? And then it keep going. So as if this graph is moving down, it's improving. If it's flat, like right now, it's flattened out. That means it's not, based on the information you gave it, it's not doing any better of a job. Okay, you have to make a change in order to produce a change. Okay, so two ways to do that. If you think the dose can go lower on your OAR, then you should lower that objective. Okay, if you just literally want it to do a better job at meeting the constraint that you're giving it, you can up your priority. But for this plan, we're not going to do that. We're going to keep this at 50, keep these at 100. Okay, that's what I want you guys to do. And we'll, as the semester goes, we'll talk about when it's appropriate to up your priority versus lower your objective. Okay, keep dragging this down a bit. Okay, and for a really hard plan, I suggest literally doing one OAR at a time. Every time you make a move or a change, you'll see this spike. You can just sit and let it level out, let it think a little bit, let it level out. When it level out, you make a change. For this video demo, I'm going to go a little quicker than that. But the more patient you are, the better the plan will come out. And again, it's part of the learning process. How patient should you be? When should you be patient? All that type of stuff. Okay, let's, so our BAL, most of our BAL, we don't want any hot spots in our BAL. So what we could do is add an upper objective. Something like that. The problem with the optimizer sometimes, and something that takes a while to get used to, is you'll notice that I put 0%, 4600, priority 50. It basically did nothing. Nothing spiked. Our BAL is still way down here, basically at 0, right? It's 0.3. Our cost function on our BAL constraint is 0.3%. So basically, it's not doing anything to this constraint. And that the reason it's all percentage games. So I'm telling 0% to be at 4600, the priority of 50. If you look at this, maybe only, 5% of that BAL is failing that constraint. So it's doing a pretty good job, okay? And it's a large volume, 500 cc's. It's the largest volume of all of the structures that we have in the optimizer right now, okay? So it's a large volume, such a small percentage of it is failing. It thinks it's doing a good job, basically. So if you put a max dose constraint on something, you likely are going to have to up your priority. I suggest for max doses, definitely don't lower your dose too much. So I would not want to put something lower in here. So our target overlaps with this BAL. So I don't want to tell it, to get lower dose than our prescription. At the lowest I want to go is 4600 because that's our prescription and it overlaps. So this is one case where you would probably start upping your priority. But 5000 is not the worst, but you can see if we do start upping this priority here, the max dose to that bowel structure will start to come down. You just got to be careful because you can see I put 4600 in there, and you see where it's overlapping with our PTV. It's getting pretty cold, right? So I probably would want to put something like 47 in there if I'm going to up my priority that high, because we need to allow, above 4600 to go where it's overlapping. So max doses and overlapping structures can get kind of tricky, but again, we'll keep learning as we go. What else? Femoral head. Usually, with our NTO set up and using our priorities set this way, usually our femoral heads are going to be okay. So they're fine. We're not even going to put an objective on those femoral heads. Our penile bulb, we can try to lower a little bit. Okay, and then all I'm doing is kind of looking at my dose distribution, looking at that 50 line and trying to determine if I can do better, on these OERs. So right now I'm kind of focused on my bladder and my rectum. Bladder, it looks pretty good. It's pushing dose out pretty well. Rectum, we can maybe do a little better up top. Might pull that down just a hair. Maybe I'll add an additional objective in there. Just trying to shape the line out and the dose distribution out to where what I want it to look like personally, just what I think is best. Then after you do that, you're going to start looking at your objectives that you're trying to meet. Okay, let me pull up our grading rubric. Okay, if you look at our grading rubric, the first OAR that's on there is rectum, and we want V40 less than 10%. So now, after I've kind of generally shaped it out how I want it to look, now I'm going to start looking at my objectives. So I want V40 less than 10%. So I'm going to look at my 40 gray area. I'm going to pull the dose down right there specifically. I need this to be less than 10%. We're basically right at 10% right now, so I just need it to come down just a little bit. All right, so I put an objective right there. Next one is V22.5 less than 25%. So that is somewhere right around in here. So we need right here to come down. I'm going to just move that one up right about there. So 2250 is at 37% right now, so we need that to come down quite a bit. Okay, so we're going to keep an eye on that. Next one is bladder, V40 less than 17.5. Bladder, V40, 17.5. So we're pretty much meeting that one, but we'll put an objective right there anyways, just to make sure that dose stays below and passes. And then bladder V22.5 less than 60. So that one we're definitely meeting on our bladder, right? So it's really just right here, this rectum, that we're going to keep an eye on. But we're not going to push any harder right now. We're going to leave it as is. Okay, we're going to leave our priorities at 50. I feel like, we shouldn't drag these much lower. Again, you don't want to, doing something like this, dragging our objective way lower than where our line actually seems to be settling, is in general not going to give you the best plan. In general, I want my OERs to be lower than my PTV. Okay, so when we drag this too low, you can let it sit if you want and see if your PTVs, go up, but in general, I want my PTVs to stay at the top of my graph down here. So I'm going to just put that back up a little higher. So we got our PTV initial. Our PTV boost is down here, but let's look at this. The reason why is just because it's having a very easy time with getting coverage to that volume. Okay, struggling a little bit more with our PTV initial, but still looking pretty good. So when before you push play, before you get out of step 3 in level 1, your plan should be 90% of the way there. Okay, you should feel pretty good about how your OERs are starting to look. Your coverage, you should basically have pushed on your OERs hard enough to lose just a little bit of your coverage, right? It should look something like this. Okay, you lose a little bit of your coverage. I would argue that we can maybe push even a little harder and lose a little more coverage, but for now we're just gonna move on. Okay, so I'm gonna push play. I'm gonna let this get, I'm not gonna do anything until this gets now into level 2, MR level 2. So let me talk about what these levels mean. So they're called resolution levels. So you can kind of think of it that way. So we start at a coarse resolution and we move our way to a fine resolution. But what's happening kind of behind the scenes is that in level 1, no machine limitations are being enforced. It's just allowing everything. It's allowing anything and everything to happen machine-wise, okay? And then as it starts to move forward, it starts to slowly enforce more and more machine limitations, things like MLC speed, how far they can travel, gantry speed, dose rate, all that type of stuff. Starts to enforce a little bit more of those. And a couple more things happen. We'll talk about, we'll go into a little bit more depth another week on these levels, but for now I just want you to focus on what I'm doing at each point in each level. Okay, so 3 is when I add all my objectives. Now once it gets into level 2, so step 1 level 2, I'm going to pause it. I'm going to let this graph level out a little bit. You can see it's falling pretty rapidly, pretty quickly. So whenever you see that, you definitely just want to pause it. Let it work through its issues. As it's falling, it's just improving. So you want to let it improve, let it get better. And as you move through your levels, if you look at your dose distribution, it just should get smoother and smoother. The further along you get in this optimizer, things should just start to smooth out, should be conformal, more homogeneous, just look better. So right now we're still pretty early on. You can see it just kind of looks all squirrely. That, you don't worry about that. You just need to kind of look at your general shape of your dose, and if you're happy with that, then you're okay. Okay, the only big problem with our plan is we have this big hot spot right here. And it's tough to get rid of that because the only objective we have telling it not to do this is this NTO. But again, the NTO is working on the whole body. The body's a very large structure. So overall, the NTO is doing really good. It's just this one tiny little spot right here that it's doing, pretty poorly on. But generally that starts to improve as we move forward. So it's still falling, It's starting to level out, so I'm going to continue, but I mean, I would probably, if I was you guys, let this level out even a little bit more. But anyways, what I do in level 2, I'm going to add 3 objectives. So I'm going to put an extra lower on both these PTVs. Okay, so the idea is in step 3, we're going to push a little bit too hard on our OERs, right? Or sorry, in step 3 in level 1, we're going to push a little too hard on our OERs, okay, so that we lose a little coverage. And now we're going to, in step 2 or level 2, we're going to get that coverage back, which might raise our OERs just slightly in order to get that coverage back. But that's how you know. that's how I know in my mind that I have my OARs as best as I can get them. Okay, that's how I know if I'm failing an objective. It's probably because it's just not possible, right? You need to push too hard, and then it's just kind of you're balancing that teeter-totter, right? You're pushing too hard, and then in level 2 you get it back just a little bit. Otherwise, if you never push harder, then maybe you should. You just don't know that if you can, right? You don't know if you can get a better plan. You need to test the system, and if you guys do that, if you really test it, push hard, you'd be surprised at how good of plans you can get. And if you give it time, if you pause in the right time, let it think, you can get some really good results. Okay, so we're going to get that coverage back that we lost. And again, I would have probably pushed a little harder and lost a little more coverage. But anyways, for these, I put 97 or 98, something less than 100, and then I'm going to put something slightly over prescription. So just like 4650. And then my priority is 120. Okay, so we're just trying to shape out this shoulder up here a little bit. Make sure we have at least that 95% coverage, which is what we're aiming for this particular plan. Whoops, 98. Okay, so we're just pushing that shoulder up and to the right, increasing that coverage. And then to get rid of the hot spots, what I do actually is put an upper max dose constraint on my body. Now, this constraint gets people sometimes. I promise you probably have never seen anyone else do this, and the dosimetrists you work with in clinic have probably never seen anyone do this. I swear it works though. Show them, have them try it out. I promise good results. So you can see, oh shoot, I did this a little quick, but we had this big, huge hot spot, this big, huge tail right here, okay? And if you push hard on your OERs and stuff and coverage, and if you really push your plan to the limits, you're always gonna have that big, long tail. There's gonna be a hot spot somewhere, okay? I promise you, if you add an upper like this, so 0%, 105%, a priority of 300, even 400 on your body, it's going to get rid of that hot spot really well. It's going to do a really good job. The rest of your plan is going to stay looking good. And I promise it works better than pushing on like your PDV uppers. Okay. But don't take my word for it. Experiment for yourself. Big part of learning this is just experiment. If you guys have an idea, try it out. Try it, doesn't work, start over, no problem. You need to kind of test the software and just see some of this for yourself. But anyways, this is just a little tip. That's what I do. So level 2, add those 3 objectives, or just you add an extra lower on all your targets. 98%, 97%, something like that, slightly over prescription or priority 120. Add the upper on your body, priority of 300, even 400. If that tail was still kind of there and looks like it was going to stick around, I would put 400 in here. But anyways, you let this level out. You can see this leveled out. So we'll play. Let this get to level 3. Anytime you see a spike like that, it's going to do that every time it gets to a new step or level. Okay, and it's because, like I was saying, all of a sudden the rules change, right? It's starting to enforce machine limitations, or something is changed now. The rules have changed. So it spikes like that and has to come up with slightly different solutions to the problem, right? In order to meet those rules. That's why it does it. Always a good idea when it spikes to pause it and let it level out. Okay. So in the clinic, for all my real plans, I would pause this, let it level out before I continue. For this video though, I'm just going to let it play through. But you can see it's still falling very rapidly. That just means it's improving very rapidly. The more you let it sit and improve, the better your plant will look. Look at our dose distribution now. It just spiked again, but you can see it's getting a lot cleaner. It looks a lot cleaner, a lot smoother. Overall, it just looks better. You can see that hot spot. Like I said, there's still dose there. Ideally, we would not want that dose above prescription right there, because here's our PTV. So we'll probably run this again and clean that up. But you can see that that major hot spot is gone. So things do clean up as you go. I paused it just because it is falling pretty quickly. Now in level 3, sometimes I do make edits here, sometimes I don't. I just check over my plants. So if I look at my dose distribution and I feel like I need to push harder somewhere, I will push harder in level 3. And then if we look at our objectives, so let's look at them again. So rectum, V40 less than 10. So V40 is less than 10. So it's probably about 7-8%. Okay, so good. I don't need to do anything with that one. V22.5 less than 25. So we come here, V22.5, you see there, 24%. So it's right there on the edge. Okay, so I probably, just to make sure we do meet that, I'm probably gonna up this just a little bit. Okay, this is where I would start changing your priorities slowly. So you can see I upped that only by 10 and we got that little spike, right? That's good. That's what you want to see. So now if we look at 2250, somewhere around here, you know, it's falling a little bit. That's good. We don't need it to fall too much, because if we're under 25%, right, I'm just trying to give myself a couple of percent wiggle room in case we need to normalize a little bit or something like that. So literally just a small change is all you need to do. If I was still close or still failing, I would then just bump it up another 10. So just literally 10 at a time, okay? And you can see it's improving a little bit more. So in places where you think you can or you need to, just 10 at a time. If you start to see a loss in coverage while doing this, that's when you just need to stop. Okay, stop and then let it calculate, let it finish, and then evaluate whether or not you think that constraint is possible or not. Okay, bladder, V40 less than 17.5. We're at 14%, so pretty good. And then 22.5 less than 60. We're well below that. So right now, our plan is good. Everything passes, everything meets. It's starting to level out a little bit. Let's hit play, let it continue. You can see when it got to step 2 in level 3, it spiked again. Same thing, always a good idea to hit that pause button, let it level out. But for this video, I'm just gonna let it play through. By now, things should be looking really pretty good. If we scroll through here, we're really pretty conformal. Our 50 line is really pushing in around our OERs just like we want it to. Our DVH looks good. We're meeting our constraints. Get to level 4. Again, I would pause it, let it level out, but we'll just play through. The only thing that I could say that we might not be super happy with is this extra dose right here. But we'll take a look when it finishes and decide if we want to do anything about that. Okay, you can see once it finishes that intermediate dose, excuse me, it pops it back into level 4. And again, the idea is the dose distribution might change a little bit after that slightly more accurate dose calculation. So it gives the optimizer a second chance at, cleaning up those little changes. Okay. Also a good time if it does that and you're not happy with your plan, we can back it up, to level 2 or 3. If you're going to go to level 1, I suggest starting all the way over. But there are certain times where I think it's appropriate to back it up to level 3 and level 2. And again, we'll talk more about that as the semester goes on. But in general, I just hit the pause button super quick, make sure this levels out, and then let it finish up. So you click play, it'll finish, and since we have automatic optimization mode checked, it'll jump out of the optimizer by itself and then calculate our plan for us. Okay, when it finishes, we can close this screen and review our plan. So we're shooting for 95% coverage. So you can definitely throw this in there if you want. But remember, this is on our PTV total. We want to make sure we have good coverage on both of our PTVs. So if we open up our DVH, we can see our we can see our PTV initial is the one with lower coverage, and it's just not quite at 95%. It's super close, right? At 4600, we're at 94.5. So we just need to come down a tiny bit more. There we go, over 95% coverage. All right, our hotspot's only 108.4, so that's pretty good. Next, I would look at my DVH and evaluate all of our structures. I'm not going to do that now, but you guys will need to do that. If we look at that spot that looked like it was getting too much dose right here, on our axial, the reason why it's doing that is because these targets are so close to each other. So we could try to get that dose out of there. Probably not a huge deal though if you leave it there. So if your plan looks like this, I think that's perfectly fine. We'll go over how to fix this issue in one of our upcoming assignments. But if we scroll through, our plan looks fairly conformal. We don't have any hotspots. Our coverage is good. As long as our OERs are good, this is a good plan. If your OERs are not passing, if you need to change this. So if you have a big problem, if something looks horribly wrong, you just need to probably start over. But if you're just a couple percent off on one of your OERs or something like that, you just need to move dose a little bit. What I suggest doing is hopping back in the optimizer. I'm going to check both these boxes probably again, or after the first run, a lot of times you can usually skip intermediate dose. But anyways, we're going to start. I'm going to continue. So like I said, if you need to make a big change, just start over. I would delete all the extra constraints I put in, start with only those initial ones at 100. Just act like you're completely starting over, start again. But if you're making just a little change, we can continue. It's going to pop you into level 4. What I do is back it up to level 3. So I back it up to level 3. I hit the pause button, and I treat it just like I treated this the first time I ran it, right? We should be really, really close. If I just need to tweak some of my doses here, this is where I do it. I do it again, okay? So if I'm, feeling one of my constraints, I pick that objective that I was using to push in that area, and I up my priority slowly, until I feel like we're going to pass that constraint, okay? And then I let it play through again, just like I did the first time. All right, that's it. Okay, if you have any questions, please let me know.